Hey everybody, Dave Walker here. Happy to bring together, as we are in the second day of our event, bring together leaders from large B to SMB brands and their peer counterparts over with very large advocacy organizations that represent, in many cases, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of small business. And today, I'm really excited to bring these two guys together. They've actually never met before. But they both represent two incredibly powerful players in this business to small business ecosystem. The first is Derek Peebles, who's the executive director of AMIBA, which stands for, Derek, what does AMIBA stand for?
Sure, the American Independent Business Alliance.
Thank you. And your acronym is AMIBA. That's why we say AMIBA. Thank you for clarifying that. And Joe Pascaretta, who runs the small business unit for Dun Bradstreet for D&B. Joe, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to bring you two guys together. And why don't we start with just simple introductions? Give us the 411 on you, your organization, your background. Love to hear your story. So Derek, why don't you start?
Sure. So it's great to be here with you, Dave, and it's nice to meet you, Joseph. And I'm Derek Peebles, the executive director of AMIBA since July of 2019. I've served on the board of AMIBA for several years, since about 2015, when I started getting involved in the organization, when I was involved in economic development here in Cincinnati. And so AMIBA was founded in 2001 to build a movement that supports the development of locally owned and independent businesses. And so in the past 20 years, AMIBA has helped form or grow more than 60 independent business alliances that are geographically dispersed around the country. And these independent business alliances, which we call IBAs, count for over 50 to 60,000 local businesses as members, that we are all united in support of protected local economies. So we are very uber specific about local, and the independent businesses that we serve are businesses that are not tied to a chain. And so they're more than 50% privately owned, and most of their business is done within a central location. And so over the years, AMIBA has promoted the terms buy local and local first, and we've helped play a key role in helping those concepts and that language really become prevalent across the country. And through our advocacy work, that's what we are, we're advocates. We have demonstrated and we've publicized the importance of local businesses to our national economy. And the pandemic has brought such a hyper awareness around the impact of local. So we've been very busy the past couple of years. So these efforts include educating consumers, but also educating policymakers about how small businesses create sustainable jobs and how purchases from small businesses buying local really circulate and multiply dollars in local communities. And so we highly tout the local multiplier effect. For every $3 you're spending in your community, it produces $7 of economic impact. And so over the past 2 years, we've been heavily involved with the SBA, with Congress, trying to get monopoly regulations enforced and helping our local businesses weather the pandemic.
So that's, I would assume that $7 of local impact of $3 spent would not include money that goes to Seattle, Washington, to a certain player whose name begins with A. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's a good analogy, okay. But that's spot on.
Yep. Okay. Terrific. Joe, give us your 411 and the new D&B, what you're doing there.
Absolutely. Well, again, it's great to be here, Dave and Derek, and I'm very excited about the conversation. So Dun Bradstreet is a publicly traded global organization that really helps companies to improve their business performance, their business outcomes through data and inputs that it's delivered through our data cloud and our live business identity. Specifically from a small business perspective, we help over 1 million small businesses. We support over 1 million small businesses, really harness the power of that data in all facets of their business, from the minute they're thinking about starting a business to planning, launching, and really managing and growing their business. And we do this in a way where we allow the small business owner to establish and build their business credit profile to help them understand the importance of that business credit profile, but also give them tools and capabilities to potentially help and impact their business credit, as well as position themselves for success in front of enterprise buyer and supplier buyers across the United States and across the world. Folks might have heard of our DUNS number, which is a unique 9-digit identifier. It basically is unique to your organization. And we do that in a way to help small business owners prove they are who they say they are, and also help establish their business credit profile.
And I think important to mention that you, I don't think you're ever an ex-small business owner, right? It kind of stays in your DNA, but you own small businesses for quite some time. Is that correct?
That's correct. So, I'm honored to be the general manager of small business at DNB. But well before that, I actually ran 2 small businesses in the great state and city of Detroit, Michigan. Ironically and interestingly enough, during the 2008 financial crisis. So had a little glimpse of what small business owners are dealing with today in today's time with COVID, but ran 2 small businesses, from soup to nuts. And actually while I was in college, so had an even greater challenge with that regard of being a young entrepreneur and an entrepreneur that was, had to constantly prove the value and what we did and the legitimacy. So it was quite the challenge. But as you said, Dave, absolutely. It was one of those things, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. And so I'm honored and privileged to be running the strategy and go-to-market at DNB for small business owners representing.
Very cool. Derek, describe the challenges that AMIBA is helping small business address right now.
Sure. And that's loaded. I would say, let's start back to the beginning of the pandemic. The challenges, obviously, that we were seeing, a lot of our businesses and our networks are Main Street type brick and mortar businesses, a lot of independent solo restaurateurs, and they really had issues with obtaining access to credit during the pandemic to keep their doors open. And so we were very busy in helping our networks and independent businesses really explore PPP. And Dave, I think we had talked about this before, but one of the things that we learned very early on is that businesses that were able to get help from the Payment Protection Program that was enacted by Congress, the ones who were able to get the most help were located in geographic areas where community banks were more prevalent. Mm-hmm. And in geographic areas where we had businesses predominantly in big metropolitan areas, they got less help out of PPP. And what this taught us was that there was a huge strain being put on small and community banks, but that's where our networks really got the most help. And so we have been busy with that. And now looking at 2 years later, a lot of our businesses succeeded. A lot of our businesses did better during the pandemic because they were able to shift their business model and to e-commerce and things like that. I would say, so a lot of policy advocacy is what we've done over the past 2 years. And I would say the strongest problem right now, looking at 2 years later, is access to credit. And so we have been busy, partnered with the American Sustainable Business Council and the South Carolina Small Business Chamber of Commerce on a campaign to reform the SBA. And there's a lot of different things that we're supporting there, but the nation right now is at a 40-year low in new business startups. And so a significant contributor to this serious economic problem, of course, is lack of capital to start businesses and grow micro businesses. And this is the primary issue that we're dealing with at the moment.
It's interesting that you cite that statistics, because you've clarified that for me in the past, that as much as we kind of get drunk with the good news that, boy, there's a lot of new businesses that are starting up through this pandemic. It's really proportionately not that many, and so to hear it at a 40-year low is a little bit of a gobsmack. Joe, from your perspective, what are the challenges? And I imagine that some of this will echo basically for what Derek is saying and what he's trying to address. But what are some of the challenges that that D&B right now is focused on in helping with small business?
Yeah, and absolutely, kind of echoing what Derek was saying, there are similar challenges to what we've been facing. One in particular that, we struggle with every day and we're really focused on is education and awareness of business credit just in general. We see a lot of confusion around consumer versus business credit. We see a lot of small business owners, especially the micro businesses, where there's over 23 million of them in the US alone, not really understand the difference between their personal credit, establishing business credit from day one, and understanding the importance of doing that, in establishing that, in ensuring that they're legitimate business, they're representing themselves the best way they can, but also as they grow, as they hire, ensuring that their business profile is reflective of the growth and they're putting their best foot forward. So really it's getting that awareness and education out there is one of the top challenges. And that's where, as we talked, Dave, about, meeting a small business owner where they're at, where they're transacting, that's absolutely critical. And we've been growing in that regard.
I think you guys, given the connection between each of your missions and what you're trying to do, could you talk a little bit? Originally, I thought we would talk about gaps between what you had as an advocacy organization, Derek, and gaps that you felt, Joe, that maybe advocacy organizations had when it came to understanding D&B. But could you talk a little bit about where would you most like to work together as an advocacy organization and a brand, both on either side of the financial health of small business? So Derek, I mean, hopefully that isn't too much of a flea flicker to you, but if you could try to answer that question, I think that would be really helpful to the audience.
Well, yeah, I think if you were to play back the tape of our introductions, I think there's a natural connection between Joseph being able to help businesses understand their credit profile, and where we have struggled from AMIBA, getting our independent business owners access to capital. And so I think that's a natural connection. A lot of our businesses probably don't understand the ins and outs of Dun Bradstreet, but when it comes to the lack of education around getting your numbers and your profile in order, I would say that that's been a big challenge to businesses getting help out of the PPP because they didn't know how to fill out the application or didn't understand their own profile of their credit worthiness. And so I think that's a natural kind of connection, is to co-learn, but also be able to educate our networks to get them more prepared to weather storms like we've been going through with this pandemic.
And Joe, from your side, I guess maybe focus a little bit on beyond just the credit worthiness that D&B hopes to represent on behalf of small business, particularly the DUNS number. There's a lot more to it than just simply your credit application. Could you talk a little bit about other ways in which that can help those small businesses?
Absolutely. So, and the DUNS number is, that unique identifier. Many folks might have heard of it, but the reality is the DUNS number in today's age, we see a lot of fraud. We see a lot of, is a business owner who they say they are. It's establishing that legitimacy. Are they legitimate? Is that a real entity? And does that owner own that business? We've seen several hundreds of fraud cases around small business every single day, every single week, every single month. And it's unfortunately, it's on the rise. We see a lot of fraud. And so that's where having that unique DUNS number and claiming it, and it's your business and it's owned by you. We do steps and checks to ensure that it's the actual business owner. And it's a pretty rigorous process, but we've made it a bit more streamlined to make it easier for the small business owners. But that in and of itself right there, establishing your DUNS number, establishing your business credit profile, the reality there is it's twofold. One, it's for the small business owner to ensure that they own it, that they've claimed their profile. But the second thing is for folks looking at small businesses and small business profiles, once they see that DUNS has been registered, they can accurately know that that is a legitimate business. So we see a lot of organizations leverage the DUNS number as a way to validate they are who they say they are. And that's something in today's society with all the fraud that's going on and the many cases that we hear on a day in, day out basis.
So does that validation help get contracts like government contracts or major procurement departments? Does that help in that so small business can sell into those?
For many organizations, they actually require it, not for all, but for many. So step one is usually creating your DUNS and building that profile, establishing that profile. Many organizations do have that as a requirement.
Derek, take us into the ugly world of making policy, of small business policy in particular. And all kidding aside, I think that it's a mystery. It was to me 18 months ago exactly how Derek Peebles and an AMIBA organization actually went about the task of influencing and helping to create policy that impacted small business. Can you kind of give us a primer on the work that you do interfacing with federal government, state government, local government to really influence the policies that are impacting small business?
Yes, I would say that primarily, and real quick, just to double back on what Joseph said, as a previous banker, the Dun Bradstreet number was a requirement for any type of small business loan, and I think that's still the case with the SBA as well. So just wanted to kind of double back on that. I would say that for a long time, AMIBA has been very much involved in educating policymakers around enforcing antitrust laws. And that's really kind of the area where there's a lot of buzz right now, because we did a survey of about 400 independent businesses over the pandemic, and they all felt that the pandemic was making antitrust enforcement and the regulation of monopolies an important issue. And so when you think about small business recovery in the post-pandemic phase, we have to put regulations in place to make sure that the markets remain competitive. And right now they're not. And so, or there's yes, I mean, there's a lot of issues there. But so we at AMIBA hosted a call last week with Senator Amy Klobuchar to discuss these issues. And when you look at a lot of the independent businesses that are involved in hospitality, when you look at independent businesses now that they've transitioned to e-commerce because of the pandemic, they are being charged exorbitant fees by big tech companies to remain on their platform. Also, their information and their intellectual information is being stolen, and so there's a lot of issues to unpack there. But our process generally involves us taking what we're learning from the policy advocates and translating that into language that our businesses on the street understand. If I was to go and walk into a small bike shop down the street from my house here, and I was to walk in and talk to Gary about antitrust issues and how they're impacting your business, he's going to look at me weird and it's like, what are you talking about? But when you put that into language around platform fees that they're being charged, that is a antitrust issue. And so a lot of that work really involves educating our independent networks, but it's really important to collect their stories, because oftentimes when they're talking about stories around the challenges of their business, they often don't realize that many of the issues that they're talking about are because of anti-competitive practices in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we're taking those stories and then we're translating that into policy with our policymakers, with our politicians, but also with the policy advocates. And let me tell you, that is a lot of work. You know, and so we're constantly in the space of convening and bringing together policy experts and bringing together our independent businesses on the street and getting them in a room together to translate the language. And that's really the number one goal, is translating the language and then finding commonalities of how we could take action together. So then that turns into us reaching out to local policymakers where we have alliances, and then connecting them to statewide and federal issues. And I'll tell you that when you really look at the landscape of that, our business owners are really getting engaged. And it's because of the fear that they have in the post-pandemic around fair markets.
So that was an absolutely terrific answer. I mean, and I got it, which is hard for me to sometimes get how the sausage is made. But Joe, I wonder if in your role, and I know you've had some interactions with, you know, large government entities on behalf of D&B, would you describe the challenge with policy making that's going to positively impact small business is the education of the policymakers themselves?
Absolutely. I think it's, you know, as much as I talk about the small business owner needing more education, needing tools, needing more awareness around business credit and establishing it and the importance, I also believe at the policy making level, I think it's very, very similar. I think there is a bit of an education awareness going on. It's definitely one of the things here at D&B we've been doing. We obviously have a strong relationship with the governmental units. Obviously, a lot of the government leverages and harnesses the power of D&B data. But when it comes to the actual, what we do with small business owners and how we support and how we engage and interact outside of these large data sets and these different demographical archival sets around data, that really is where we've been noticing it's been education for them as well. And we've been trying to really push that a bit more, not only on the state level. We notice, especially from when you look at the Washington level and you look at the state level, that's where we see much more engagement, but still we've been having to educate a lot of these local government entities that do support small businesses on the importance of business credit, similar to what we're doing with the actual small business owner themselves. So we've definitely seen that from the policy making level at the state level, as well as from Washington, D.C.
Do partners that can access, and I'm not trying to ask a loaded question here, by working with partners who have access to those local communities, those local policymakers, and those local businesses, does that speed the plow for you? Does that make it more efficient, more effective for you to kind of work through organizations? Or is it something that you kind of have set up the capabilities and are perfectly fine doing that on your own?
Absolutely. So this, you know, I've been at the company going on about 2 years now, and it was one of my top priorities to doing a better job of working with the state level and federal level resources. And we tried it on our own. We originally tried it on our own, knowing we had relationships, but we did find it much easier when we had partners, when we had associations, you know, groups like Derek, and when we did it in partnership and in collaboration, because they were able to talk a little bit better as to, you know, how to do it and do it in a way that was getting to the right people at the right time. A lot of the folks that we work with at broader D&B are not necessarily the right folks for getting in front of the small businesses. And that's where it has been a little bit of green space for us as an organization, especially now that, you know, we've one of our top 5 initiatives at D&B is small business and the small business owner, which is great. We found that in partnership that moves a lot quicker, and it's good for both sides. It's good for both parties and ultimately the small business owner.
So cast your memory back just a little bit, Joe, to when you were a small business owner. Did you ever feel like, boy, my Chamber of Commerce is doing a great job for me in influencing the policy that impacts my business? Or were you kind of like, nah, geez, I wish I either A, understood, or B, believed that I was really being represented in Washington or the state capitol, or even in my city of Detroit?
It was interesting when I was running the business. I wasn't as focused until there were, funding sources. There were special grants that were coming out because of the 2008 financial crisis is when I started to get much more involved. But it wasn't until after I sold the business that I got involved with groups like the NFIB and several organizations, including the White House in Washington, that I realized there was a bit of disconnect with the actual small business owner. And it was one of the reasons the NFIB brought me in, was to advocate on behalf and actually give me a seat at the table to say, what are they missing from the lens of a small business owner? So it was actually quite interesting. When I actually ran the small business, I didn't have a point of view because I was so disconnected from what they were doing. And part of it was an awareness issue. Now looking back, in hindsight, I probably should have gotten more involved when I ran the business. But it wasn't until after that I was able to say, hey, a lot of people don't know. A lot of small business owners don't even know you exist, what you're doing. And, that's really a sad thing, because that's the purpose of the organization, is to help the small business owners. And the reality is a lot of small business owners just don't know.
Derek, I see you nodding your head emphatically, and you're certainly not describing, Joe, the membership of AMIBA, because I know they think the world of AMIBA. But Derek, is what Joe is describing, do you think that that's a kind of a common perspective from small businesses?
I would say yes, that is a very common perspective of our small business owners, exactly the way that Joe described it. There's another important piece that I go back to, which is with lending as well. And so more kind of statistics, but ultimately private lenders are in the business of making money. And so private lenders, people know that they use prudent underwriting when making a loan. And these private lenders will say that they're in the business of ensuring that dollars are secure, but this is not an entirely correct assessment. And like I said, private lenders are in the business to make a profit, and that goal is appropriate and prudent underwriting, or being risk averse, is a vehicle to achieve that goal. And so this is the underlying problem with access to capital for new business startups. They are most often too risky for private lenders. And so additionally, the average startup loan is around $10,000. And that's far too unprofitable for private lenders, even if the loan is successful. And so further contributing to the problem of startups accessing capital from private lenders is the fact that there are at least 68% fewer commercial banks today compared to 1980. And that's according to the SBA Office of Advocacy. And so the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank found that in 2014, there were 1,132 banking deserts in the country. 734 of those are in rural areas. And so it is these rural and underserved communities that include Black and Brown populations that are starving for access to capital to fuel entrepreneurship. And so in March of this year, a number of national and state organizations got together to form this campaign, which is what I've been talking about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Derek, you said something earlier that I absolutely loved. You said that, AMIBA is in the business of convening. So we're convening here. Two really, really important players in the ecosystem of small businesses. So now that we've convened, starting with you, Joe, how would you like to work with, to be a little presumptuous, an organization like Derek's? How do you envision a partnership? What are the elements of it? How would you approach it?
Yeah, I think, look, over the last year, we've established some critical partnerships at both, kind of the association level and also for-profit entities. And in all the cases, and looking back, we've continued to refine how we do it. But the reality is there's a lot of new tools, capabilities that D&B have released since I've been here. And we've been very focused on some new freemium tools, some new capabilities for your general small business owner. But we're also introducing and rolling out some new tools and capabilities for minority, women-owned, kind of the underserved small business owners as well. And I think, really educating Derek, we would love to kind of give you a deeper dive into these new tools and capabilities, and then show you some examples of how we've kind of collaborated. And I always say it's kind of a real good partnership should be bi-directional. It should be both small business owners who come to D&B on a day in, day out basis. We get thousands of signups every day, and we have over 1 million that are subscribed to D&B. So we would want to promote and be able to, articulate the value of what you and your organization are doing. And then in turn, we would love to provide you the tools and capabilities that D&B brings to the market directly within your properties, directly on your website. So that way, the folks that are going, the small business owners that are going to you to leverage your tools and resources, now we're arming you with these new tools and capabilities that we just brought to market. And I think that in turn, and obviously outreach to the market, media, press, social. We'd love to do joint collaborative training and education sessions where we jointly sponsor them. We've just located a new headquarters here in Jacksonville. We're going to call this our Small Business Innovation Center. We want to bring in more small business owners, and we would love to do it in joint collaboration with you on how can we do a better job? How can we, create some roundtables around that? Maybe some member groups or innovation sessions with actual small business owners where we can get out of it. What can we do better? What can we do better, not only on education, but what tools would help that small business owner, live a better life and be able to run their business better? So that would be my proposal. Derek, I'm curious kind of your thoughts on that. If you have any thoughts, or if that sounds, like a winning solution.
Yes, Joe, that does sound like a winning solution. And I think you're speaking our language. That's exactly how we would like to partner with organizations. When you think about AMIBA's primary strengths, it's really in our numbers. We're a network of networks supporting independent businesses. We're all united in support of protecting local economies. I would say those three primary strengths are our ability to convene, our ability to advocate and run campaigns and educate not only policymakers, but our independent networks and our alliance leaders. And then I would say third is our national conference. And unfortunately, we've been unable to do a national conference since the pandemic, but I would say that's really the one time a year that all of our networks really come together and co-learn from each other. And so I would say that tools and resources that we're able to deploy to our 60 different alliances around the country that are located in 32 different states is really a thing that I think would be very beneficial. So if we're able to engage in the tools and resources that Dun Bradstreet that is putting out, then we can easily create a cohort of business networks that are convening around your tools and resources and learning how to develop them. Like I said earlier, a lot of our businesses did not get help throughout the pandemic because of their business credit profile. And so again, I think that's a natural partnership, and being able to sponsor virtual convenings that are kind of like or half workshop, but half educational. And then if we're able to create kind of a stream of follow-ups where I'm able to kick people to you, or you're able to open us up to other networks, I think that's a natural connection, and it's an exciting one at that.
Derek, is there is there an element too of creating a feedback loop to brands or to Joe specifically from your membership? It sounds like what you're describing before is you spend a lot of time in the middle of conversations, often as the translator. And I know a lot of brands feel like they miss what small business are trying to tell them. Is there a role for advocacy organizations to be that translator?
Sure, sure. That's our purpose, is to support the growth and development of locally owned independent businesses, and we can't do that without partnerships. And we know that all of our networks, they do business with they operate with big business, and so we are well positioned to be the translator for organizations within your network. And there's a way that, because we talk about us translating language, when it comes to the stories that we're collecting, it's important not only for us to collect those stories, but to let organizations like you and organizations like Dun Bradstreet know what these stories are, and then be able to translate that into policy. So not only can we be a link for translating language and putting out narratives, we can also be a link to educating those policymakers, and in turn educating your networks on how to support the sustainability of small business for the future, because we all know that that's where the most of the jobs come from.
So Joe, last question, and I'll ask the same question back to you, Derek. I don't want to be so conceited to think that the partnership between advocacy organizations and brands didn't exist before I got woke to it 18 months ago. I don't want to be that presumptuous. But that said, do you think that the future of brands working with advocacy organizations is brighter now, or the same, or maybe a little harder as we look into the future?
I definitely think it's brighter. I think, one of the outcomes of this pandemic, I think it shed a lot of light on the good and the bad. And I think I wouldn't consider this a bad. I just think it was there wasn't enough of it going on. And I think this is where this linking, myself and Dun Bradstreet and Derek and his organization, I think is a huge opportunity. And I think, it's forced us to think a little bit different about getting the word out, getting the message out in critical times. And almost in hindsight, I wish we would have had this conversation a couple of years ago. So to me, I actually think it's even brighter now. And because I think we know what's working well, and we know what we can do to improve, not only in leveraging partner organizations, but also their end constituents that engage. I personally believe it's even brighter now.
And Derek, from your perspective?
Sure. The pandemic, there's never been such a heightened awareness around the impact of small business. Unfortunately, the pandemic is what brought that to us. And so that's the bright spot, actually, is that this horrible pandemic really kind of woken our eyes to the fact that there's a lot of things happening in our national economy, and it's important for us to break those silos. So even when we heard back, when we were listening to the stories around 9/11 and how that horrible event happened, and we started learning that our intelligence agencies weren't communicating with each other, they weren't sharing their data, right? And it led to a catastrophe. And so when you think about that analogy in terms of where we are with this pandemic, yes, it's more important now than ever for us to start sharing our data, our stories with organizations like Dun Bradstreet, like B2SMB Institute, and really kind of bring those connections together and break those silos. Now is the time for that to happen, for the sole purpose of protecting our national economy.
Derek, thanks for representing AMIBA so well, and more importantly, representing all advocacy organizations so well. You are one of my advocacy heroes. And Joe, thank you for representing, as we've talked about before, this venerable brand of D&B that's been around for, what was it, 160 years?
180 years.
180 years. And how many presidents have been at D&B?
4 former presidents.
4 former presidents of the U.S. I don't think there's not many states that have 4 presidents that they can count. So that's pretty amazing. But thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you both, guys.
We appreciate it. Thank you. And Derek, very much looking forward to collaborating and working together from this. Dave, thank you for making the connection.
Dave, again, thank you for making the connection. I love spending time with you. And Joe, we definitely need to connect sooner than later.